All right, my friends. So we are starting our unit on scene work. Obviously, you got your scenes the other day and we started looking at them and looking at the given circumstances, what information you found in the scenes themselves. So I just wanted to actually go over with you, how do you even do this, right? How do you even work on a scene? How do you build it? You've done a small scene, but it's a slightly different process, right? The first scene you did was an open scene. You had a lot of leeway to just kind of come up with whatever you wanted to do, all right? And I gave you some specific processes to do that. But when you're working on a scene from a play, it's a little bit different. So there's some steps that you can take. So there are all these pieces that we need to consider when we work on a scene, okay? We have our analysis, and you've already done one of those for your first scene, and it was just kind of just going to do what I think it is and see what happens, right? Your analysis is made up of your given circumstances, objectives, obstacles, and tactics. You also have something we're going to start to work a little bit with today, hopefully text analysis, which is where we look at punctuation, language, style, patterns, any of the tools and techniques that the playwright is using to create the piece of work, right? And so as actors, it's our job to kind of understand how to deconstruct that and understand how to use the text that the playwright has put down on the page. Playwrights are very specific and very deliberate. If any of you have done any writing at all, you know that when you write stuff, you don't just write it and then hand it in. You don't just write a story and then hand it in. You review it, you reflect on it, you look at word choice, you look at how you're constructing things. It's a very specific process, and a playwright is no different. So they're very intentional about the choices that they make. They're very intentional about designing how specific characters speak and how their stories unfold. So it becomes our job as actors to see if we can unlock some of that and discover some of the intentionality that the playwright is writing with. We, of course, have to memorize lines, right? So we need to know what we say and when we say it. So that's not just about learning your lines. You're also, as you learn your lines, you kind of start to learn the other person's as well, because you're learning your cues, right? So you need to know when you say your lines. So you need to understand, like, what does your scene partner say? You don't necessarily have to memorize their lines, but you need to be familiar with what they're saying, and you need to know what's the cue for you to speak, all right? You need to figure out the setting for the scene, right? So you need to know if you are going to need furniture, props. You need to know where your entrance and exit points are if you use them in the scene, right? So that's another thing to even discover is, does either actor enter or exit during the course of the scene? Or are they both on stage the whole time? Do they both enter? Does only one enter? Do they both exit? Does one exit? Does no one exit, right? So you have to know those things, just like you did with your first scene that you played with. And really just knowing the lay of the land. So knowing what is the environment that we're setting up here, what are the set pieces or the pieces of furniture that we're giving ourselves to work with, and therefore how can we work within that environment. What I often do with this play is I set, and we can do this if it's helpful, but I can give you an example of how you can lay out the space that you have to work in so that it feels more like an actual space. You know, we talked a little bit the other day about how when reading this play, it seemed kind of easier to imagine it as a film, right? Because it seems very much just two people sitting talking. When we give ourselves a setting and we actually add furniture and we think of it as the space that is intended in terms of the play itself, it starts to help us to think a little bit more about, okay, well, how might we behave, and therefore how might we move within this environment, right? In the same way that if you're at home and you're with a family member, you're probably not just sitting in one spot for an hour, right? You're probably existing in that space while you are having interactions with people. So it's the same kind of idea. You need to work out the blocking. So the blocking is the movement within the scene. And we did this again with your first scenes. We talked about entrances, exits, when we're going to sit, when we're going to stand, when we're going to hand things to each other. All of the movements that happen within a scene are called the blocking, okay? So, entrances, exits, large movements, strategic use of props. So if there's any moments where it's in the script that you have to give something to someone or point something out or take something from someone or move something, those are things that you need to make sure that you plot into the blocking so that they can happen. Because if you're saying that you're giving something to someone and then you don't do it, clearly that doesn't make sense, right? So you start with what's in the script. What does the script tell us that we need to do? And then from there you can start to fill it up even more, and you can find more movement and more adjustments and things as you play the scene and as you get more familiar with what it feels like is happening. All right, so you might find that in some moments it feels really important to you to be right in the other character's face. And you might find in other moments that you just want to get away from them. So that's how you start to figure out, okay, well, I'm going to then move away. There's some blocking. I take 3 steps towards stage left. Or I have to get closer to them because I have to really make my point. Okay, so I'm going to cross back to the table and I'm going to lean on the table and I'm going to get in their face. So that's blocking choices, okay? But they come from a feeling of needing something, all right? Movement comes from a need to do something or a need to communicate with someone else. You also need to talk about, when you're working out your blocking for your scene, physical contact and consent, right? Because some people, we all have different levels of comfortability in terms of being in physical contact with people. Some of us are just like, yep, whatever, no worries, grab my hand, slap me across the face, doesn't matter. If it's for the scene, I'm good with it, right? But not everyone feels that way, right? So it's really important to have a conversation with your partner before you start the blocking and say, like, what are the boundaries that we have when we're blocking a scene? Do we want to just do the whole scene without any physical contact? If something happens and we feel like, oh, I feel like I really want to grab your arms on this line, or I really want to take your hand, or I want to put my hand on your shoulder, is that kind of stuff okay? Is there anything we would be uncomfortable with? Okay, it's important to have that conversation so that you've just kind of set those boundaries for each other and you know what the parameters are for movement and contact and things like that. Communication. So this is the acting part, right? Acting is communicating. Acting is needing something from another person, and the way we get things from other people is that we communicate with them. So this is the really important piece that happens once we know all of the things, right? We know the given circumstances, we're getting to know the characters more, we're starting to feel like we understand what they want in the scene, we start to get a sense for how they're going about getting it, then we have to connect it to the other person, right? Everything we do is about the other person, communicating something to the other person. So that's where we are headed, right? And we want to go through all these different steps and make sure that we're looking at all these different areas so that we can get to this final place where it's just 2 actors communicating and the audience is receiving a story, all right? Any questions so far? Cool beans. So we're going to go through the slides and then we're going to look at your scenes, okay? Line memorization, knowing what you say and when you say it. So again, you can use the text analysis packet that I'm going to link for you. I think I've even put that. It's in the module, so it's in the unit on scene work. And you want to start memorizing now, right? As soon as you get a scene, you want to start memorizing. And memorizing doesn't have to be, I'm looking at the line, I'm trying to remember the line. I'm looking at the line, I'm trying to remember the line. Memorizing can be reading the scene a bunch of times. Memorizing can be writing your lines out by hand, right? There's so many different ways that you can do it. But it is really important that you understand what you're saying in order to memorize it, right? If you don't understand what it is that you're saying, it's going to be harder for you to retain it. So you really need to look at, do I actually understand what I'm saying here? Do I understand what this character actually means by this line? And so again, those analysis things fold into every part of the process, right? Because maybe the tactic is really clear to you on a line and that helps you memorize it. Or maybe the objective is not clear to you and therefore you don't understand what some of the lines mean. So you have to look a little deeper. So all of these things kind of work together. Any questions about any of that so far? Cool. Okay, setting. We need to know furniture and props that we're going to use. We need to know entrance and exit points, and we need to know the lay of the land. What is the environment that we're in, and how are we going to set that up and establish that for ourselves so we can play in it? So again, you've got all these different things, right? What furniture do you need? What props do you need? Where are the exit entrance points? Do you refer to any other locations during the scene, right? Do you say, oh, I'm just going to go inside? Where's inside, right? I'm going to go to the backyard. Well, where's that? You have to know where those places are, right? I'm going to go downtown. Where is it, right? So just having an understanding of the environment, and if within your scene you refer to other places, do you know where they are? And is that consistent between the actors? And the other thing is just where are you going to put the furniture, right? So giving yourself a ground plan. Sometimes it can be useful to actually draw. This is going to be our playing space. There's going to be a table here, a chair here, and another chair here. And we're always going to set it up like that, and we're going to remember that that's how we do it. All right? Blocking, the movement in the scene. All the things we kind of just talked about, right? So when do you need to enter and exit? Where are you doing that from? Are there large movements dictated by the script? Are there moments where the script requires you to deal with props? There's a couple of moments in the scene where people refer to things, right? There's depending on how far we get in the scene, Gwen, that you and Taylene have, there's a moment where like you refer to a champagne bottle, but I don't know if you get that far. Because I can't remember how much of the scene I gave you. But there's things like that, right? There's the first scene between Catherine and Hal where there's a backpack that they're talking about. Give me the backpack. So where's the backpack going to be? Are you going to be carrying it? Are you going to put it on the ground? You know, so there's specific things in the play. A lot of the scenes have coffee in them, right? Do you want your coffee? Are we drinking coffee? Is the coffee inside and we don't have it yet? So you have to make those choices. To have that discussion about physical contact and consent, you can refer to the syllabus. The syllabus has a little paragraph on that. Start to play with the scene on its feet once you've set all those parameters, right? Once you've decided, okay, this is going to be our setting, these are the props that we need, these are our entrance and exit points, these are the moments in the scene where specific things need to happen. Cool. Now let's see what happens if we actually get on our feet and pretend that we're actually in this space, having this conversation. Okay? It's useful to work your scene in sections too. Okay, so you might look at the scene and go, okay, let's just do this section because this seems to make sense as, you know, like a first little unit that we could play with. All right, work on that one, find out what feels right about movement and blocking, move on to the next section. Alrighty? The other thing too is when you're working on blocking and you find things that you like, write them down so that you can keep track, because you don't think you'll forget, but then you forget, right? So it's helpful to just write it down, what you're doing here and there. And so the communication part, this is where you've got your blocking, right? You've got the set, the space, you know what's happening with props. You've really started exploring what your objectives are and what kind of tactics you're using. Now you can just play, right? It's also helpful at this point to be pretty much memorized, because this is where you really need to be able to just connect with the other actor. And it's difficult to do that when you're really, really fully on book, we would say, right? On book meaning you have the book or the script in your hand and you are relying on reading the lines every time you speak. So what we want to be is at least moderately off book before this real communication can start taking place, because we need to have access to eye contact or the choice not to make eye contact if we want to, but we need to be able to have those things be a choice rather than, hold on a sec, I just have to see what I'm going to say next. Oh, okay, yeah, now I'm going to say this. Because then we get that uninterrupted flow of communication, all right? And once you're at this point, you want to run the scene over and over again to find the rhythm of the scene, build moments of connection, build dynamic shifts in the scene, right? Sometimes scenes get really intense and then they calm down, and then they get really intense again and then they calm down. So you want to be able to find those things. It's easier to find those things once you know everything really well and you feel confident with it. Alrighty. And don't forget you have these things to play with, right? The playtime dynamics from this first scene that you worked on. Timing, connection, movement and stillness, space, and stage direction. So these things can be helpful no matter what you're working on, especially if you find that you're getting stuck, right? If you're doing a scene and you're like, we're just sitting at a table, this sucks, right? Can you go to the playtime dynamics and go, okay, well, we could play with one actor moving all the time. What if one of us is not sitting? Or what if one of us starts sitting and then gets up at this certain line and then just can't stop moving? Okay, so you have these things to use to help you to kind of find your way through your work on the scene. Alrighty?